Welcome to tonight's Better Way Thursday event. Tonight we are talking about Informational Interviewing 101, and we have Jenna Matsumura here from Zions Bancorporation who's going to be speaking with us. Jenna is a diversity recruiter specifically at Zions Bancorporation, and she works across the organization finding ways to make sure that their representation across the organization is becoming more diverse, looking for great voices and people who can make new contributions to their organization. She's got some great things to teach us tonight about informational interviewing, and she also is going to tell us about the way they do informational interviews at Zions Bancorporation, which is awesome. So Jenna, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Thanks so much, Robin, and thank you everybody for joining tonight. I am really excited to be here. This is a conversation that I am really passionate about, and so I'm going to just make sure I can share my screen. It worked earlier. Can everybody see the screen? Great, perfect. I see some thumbs up and some nods. So let's just dive in. So a little bit about me, as Robin said, I am the diversity recruiter for Zions Bancorporation. If you've spent any time in Utah, you probably really know us as Zions Bank. We're a community bank that operates in different markets in various different names, but in Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming, we're Zions Bank. And we are actually one of the largest tech employers in the state. That's not something a lot of people know about us, but we do have our technology campus currently it's in West Valley, but it will be in Midvale soon. And we actually employ about 2,100 individuals. And so if you are graduating from Tech Moms and you're looking for positions, I'd love to help you consider me your recruiter at Zions Bancorporation. One of the reasons that I'm so passionate about helping people develop their professional skills and their presence is because I was in a previous life a university career counselor before joining Zions Bank and the Bancorporation. I worked in gender equity at universities, and so working with women to better their lives is something that I have always been passionate about. And specifically for tech moms, something that I identify with is making a career change. I decided to move from higher ed into human resources in June 2020, at the height of the pandemic. I quit my job. I moved from Colorado back home to Utah, and I know how scary it is and how much vulnerability and strength it takes to put yourself out there when you're kind of reinventing who you are and what you do for a large portion of your day. That QR code with the dinosaur is my LinkedIn profile. So if you have a phone on you and you want to open up your camera, you can take a picture of that and it will take you right to my LinkedIn. I would love to connect with you there so we can stay in touch. So for informational interviewing today, I figured we would do a little warm-up activity. We'll talk about how to prepare for an informational interview, the interview itself, and then keeping the relationship alive. And as Robin said, please put any questions you have in the chat or save them for later. We'll have plenty of time to go over them. I like to get as individualized as we can while still providing good overview of what we're talking about. All right, so the warm-up activity is to write down one question you have right now about informational interviewing. If you don't have a pen and paper, maybe text it to yourself or just make a mental note, but do think of one question that you hope to get answered tonight. And then if it doesn't get answered, please bring it up at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. So first thing first, what is an informational interview? An informational interview is an opportunity for you to build your professional network, develop your toolkit, and learn about different careers and industries. Where I see people mess up informational interviewing the most is when they treat it like it is not. It is not a job interview. This is not a time for you to corner an executive or a member of a company and say, hey, I saw that you have this coding position open. I really want it, and I want to tell you all about why I am the best fit for you. That is great that you have that energy, but that's not what an informational interview is for. And it can really burn bridges when you utilize someone's time in that manner. It's also not a mentorship or a sponsorship activity. Those activities are usually more sustained. They take a longer period of time and have a deeper level of investment from you, the participant, but also from the person who's your mentor or your sponsor. Informational interviews are often one and done. That's how we do them at Zions Bank, and that's how most people expect them to go initially. Certainly, if you hit it off with somebody who you want to be in a mentorship role, that could grow naturally, but it's not something that you should go into an informational interview expecting. Why are informational interviews valuable? I think these are one of the most underutilized tools in a person's job search kit in a professional development setting. My favorite part about them is that they are a low risk opportunity. Because it's not a job search, you can ask questions about your career, about what the company is like, and get answers that you probably won't get during an interview. Because in an interview, they're wooing you and you're wooing them, which means we're all putting our best self forward. But in a low risk situation like an interview, people's boundaries are a little more flexible, and they're likely to give you a more honest answer about what their day-to-day life is like, what the challenges of the position are, what they encountered as they were building their career. So that's why I really like them. You can ask some more of those personal questions that really make the difference in our professional and personal lives. It's also a great way to build your network. I strongly encourage you, if you haven't taken or watched the course on LinkedIn, build your LinkedIn, utilize it, connect with everyone you meet. And then, as we'll talk about later, keep that relationship warm. There's also no such thing as too much information in a job search, in my opinion. Everything about a job impacts us, whether it's going to impact us well or poorly. How we prepare for those things depends on how much research we did. And so informational interviewing is really just a tool for research. When to interview. I think this is something that also people get confused about. You should be interviewing and doing informational interviews throughout your career. Even if you someday find yourself to be the CTO of a large company where you've been there for many years, you have, 30 days of vacation, you have stock options, there are still going to be things that you want to learn and need to know and that you don't know about. So always see every relationship as an opportunity to learn or meet someone new. It's also a great tool if you are looking to make a lateral or vertical move in your current position or your current career. So, a lateral move would be where you maintain the same responsibilities and scope, but you might be changing it to a different department or a different company. And then a vertical move, of course, is a promotion. And what I want to emphasize here is that informational interviews are not just with people who you don't work with. You can do an informational interview with your colleagues who are in different roles that you don't currently have, that you aspire to have someday. So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, when you're interested in changing industry. So to share my personal example, prior to this role, like I said, I worked in higher education. I have a degree in education. I do not have a degree in human resources. All I knew about human resources was that it helped people be their best selves at work. And that's what I wanted to do. So before I started searching for jobs and prepping my documents, I knew I needed to do some informational interviews. And so what I did was I reached out to my LinkedIn network to find out who of my connections had made the transition from higher education into the private industry. And I interviewed them and I asked every question I could think of. How hard was it? What was the thing you were surprised about? And really just asked all of those questions that I was too afraid to ask during an interview, to really find out if human resources was the right path for me. And that helped me save time. That meant, that what if I had not been interested in human resources and I only found that out after I had gotten a job? That wastes my time, that wastes the resources of the company. And so it was just really a good tool to find out that A, it can be done, it has been done, and B, that it was the right move for me to make. But most importantly, you need to do it, as my story exemplifies, before your job search starts. It really should be the first step you take in deciding to switch industries or make, again, that lateral or vertical move in your career. So how do you do informational interviewing? This is its process from a landscape view. You want to first identify your industry. For those of you in tech moms, you've already done that. You're interested into going into technology. You then want to identify the interviewee and do some outreach and scheduling. For a lot of people, the identification and the scheduling are the hardest parts, even though really they should be the easiest, but those are really natural feelings, and we'll talk about that more. You want to develop some thoughtful questions, and then you want to do the interview itself. You want to make sure you follow up with a warm thank you, and then you want to have continued engagement. Does anyone have any questions so far? I haven't seen the chat light up, but I just wanted to check in.
Because you're doing such an amazing job of explaining this perfectly. So I'm sure we'll have more questions as we go on, but this is fantastic.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Robin, for that feedback. So who to interview? You've decided your industry will work with all of you in tech moms. You've decided that it's technology, but maybe you are a little more advanced in your search and you know what kind of role you want to be or what role you want to have. So you might want to interview someone who has a role that you're qualified for, that you might be applying to, or a position that you will be qualified for in the future. So you might ask this person, what does your usual work day look like? Don't ask them what a day in the life looks like, because if you ask me what my Monday looks like, it's vastly different than what my Friday looks like. And this Friday looks very different from the Friday I had 3 months ago. And so you want to ask the trends of work. You want to ask them how they got where they are in the company. If you are starting out in an entry-level job, you probably want to have evidence that someone is invested in and developed by their company to have that vertical movement and that stability in their career to still have a fulfilling work life, but stay with one company. So you can ask that question. And then you also want to ask them what skills do they think will be most important for their role in the future? The thing about informational interviews is to really try to set yourself up to be well positioned for the future, not necessarily where you are now, but where you will be in a few years. Then you might also want to ask someone who has salient identities as you. So our salient identities are often our race, our gender, our religion, our ability or our disability, whether or not we have children or we have partners. Those are parts of us that we bring to work. I don't really adhere to a philosophy of a personal self versus a professional self. They both impact each other and they both have a place at work because you are who you are no matter where you go. So for me, as a woman of color, I want to ask somebody how work impacts their identities as a fellow woman of color. What is it like? Are our identities well respected? Are there other people who are going to look like me at the company? Am I going to have people who understand how I move through the world? You might also want to ask if there are professional organizations that you should join. So for instance, one professional organization that I really like is Women in Cybersecurity, right? Women that's a gender, that's a salient identity in a really male-dominated field. And by joining Women in Cybersecurity, you get a network of people who know what it's like to be a minority in a growing field, who need to also build their network. And then often you get things like mentorship and sponsorship, as well as other development opportunities like conferences. You also could ask them what they wish they had known about the position earlier. Maybe if they had known about the world of cybersecurity a little differently when they started their career, they wouldn't be in it today. Or maybe they would be in it, but they would have taken a different line of business within the greater cybersecurity realm. Oops, excuse me, wrong way. You might also interview somebody who's just in the general industry that you're in. Again, I knew that I wanted to be in HR, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a recruiter necessarily. So I was interviewing people broadly from across the spectrum of human resources. I knew I didn't want to do compensation and benefits. And so I interviewed all of the people that were recruiters, that were HR business partners, who did HRIS, which is the data side. Asking them, why did you choose this segment of the industry? What about this line of business appeals to you? And why might I be a good fit for this area? Again, what is the future of this industry? This is not necessarily the most applicable to the group here, perhaps, but what if you were interested in going into mining, right? The future of mining is in flux right now. You probably want to know what that is like for long-term stability. You also want to ask, what roles and segments should you look into next? So you interviewed somebody and they tell you all about their day-to-day life. They tell you the pros and the cons of their position, and you're not quite sold. So then ask them, what are jobs that are similar to yours that I might be interested in, who I could interview next, and do some of that snowballing as you build your network. So now you want to reach out. You've identified the industry, the type of person. You've gone on LinkedIn, ideally. Well, not ideally, but that's how a lot of people do it, is they connect on LinkedIn. They see who their first and their second connections are, and they get an introduction to somebody if they're their third connection. And so now you need to reach out. And this, for people, is where the anxious, nervous feelings start to bubble up. And I just want to be clear that those are super normal. It is, even though I said it's low risk earlier, it still feels vulnerable to go forward and ask somebody that you've never met before to invest in you and tell you about their life. So just, remember that it's normal. And you want to have some drafts. So Indeed.com actually has a really good article that I'll link to later in the chat about how to do informational interviewing. And my motto is work smarter, not harder. So I just pulled from their website, but you want to be prepared. You want to have some drafts, like I said. You want to use a thoughtful subject line. Remember that a subject line is how people decide to read an email now or later, especially if you're emailing someone who has an officer title. They're very busy. We're all busy, let's be honest, regardless of whether or not we have an officer title or not. But we want to make sure that our headline and our subject gets our point across and is attention grabbing, so they open that email earlier in their day, not 5 weeks from now. You want to be concise. Like I said, informational interviews are not a high investment thing. And so you don't want to write a paragraph or a novel about why you want to have this meeting. You're going to briefly describe yourself. So when I was reaching out to folks, I would say, hi, I am currently in higher education. I'm interested in transitioning to the world of human resources. I saw your profile on LinkedIn, and what intrigued me was X, Y, and Z. Would you be willing to meet for a 30-minute informational interview? That's it. That's all you ask. It's not a big investment of your time or their time. It is formal. You want to make sure you have proper punctuation and grammar and spelling. That's why you make drafts, and you want to be compelling. But again, it doesn't need to be a novel. 500 words is too much. We want to shoot for like 100 max. And that's a pretty long one. It's not on here, but again, if you have a mutual connection to somebody that you want to interview, have that mutual connection do an introduction. This is where the world of LinkedIn, I think, is most influential. So say Robin knows somebody who I want to do an interview for, and I know that my chances of success dramatically increase if there's a personal connection between that person and me. So what I will do is I'll message Robin and say, hey, Robin, I would really like to do an informational interview with Trina. Do you think you could do an introduction? Because Robin cares about me. She's going to say yes. And then she's going to say great things about me to Trina, and Trina is more likely to extend her warmth to me and set up an interview. So make sure you do that. So you've scheduled it. I like to do informational interviews at 30 minutes max. An hour seems like a short period of time, but when you think about an 8-hour workday, that's an eighth of somebody's day. And a 30-minute interview is much more palatable to a lot of people. Make sure that you're dressing professionally like you would for an interview if it's a video call. Make sure you have your questions prepared. I ran through a bunch when we talked about who you might choose to interview. Be ready to take notes because you're not going to remember it all. They're going to tell you a lot about their lives. One thing I know is certain about people is they love to talk about themselves. We all have egos and we all want our time in the spotlight. And that is what an informational interview is about. So that's why important to take notes, but also have those questions prepared, because yes, while you are flattering this person by asking for their wisdom and their expertise, you came here with a goal. You need to leave this informational interview knowing that your questions have been answered. So if you don't have your questions beforehand, you might go down a tangent and 30 minutes are up and realize, well, I didn't learn anything about that industry, or I didn't learn anything about this role, and I have an interview coming up, or there's a position open right now that I want to apply for. So make sure that you have those notes, that you have your goals, and that you really stick to the time limit. Again, if you said 30 minutes, at 28 minutes, you need to be wrapping up and saying, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated this. I hope you have a good day. That's it. And then after the interview, you want to keep it alive and healthy. The worst thing you can do is let a relationship go stale and then come back 6 months from now being like, hey, Robin, I saw you posted an analyst job. Will you put in a good word for me? Robin hasn't heard from me for 6 months. I haven't followed up. I haven't been kind, or, let her know what changes are happening in my life. She's not going to be inclined to do that. However, she would be more inclined to be a referral for me if I send up a follow-up email thanking them for their time and summarizing the key takeaways. I have interviewed people who send me a thank you letter 2 minutes after our interview has ended. That is a dead giveaway that thank you letter was written before we had even chatted. Because it takes more than 2 minutes to send an email. A thoughtful email that maybe lists 2 or 3 of their main takeaways. If it's really generic and sent immediately, I know that they were doing it to be perfunctory. But you really want that thank you email, like I said, is what keeps it alive. It keeps the relationship warm. So you want to summarize the key takeaways. If you haven't already, make sure you connect with them on LinkedIn. LinkedIn could be the place where you send that thank you letter. You might send that thank you email, a letter, as if we only have snail mail. You might send that email via InMail on LinkedIn or as a message to connect with them. If it does take you a couple of days to extend that connection on LinkedIn, which happens, right? Life is real and it takes our time. Just to remind them, hey, thank you again for the informational interview. I look forward to connecting with you on LinkedIn. And then let them know when major life changes happen or when you start looking for a job. This is, again, another great tool of LinkedIn because it will do it for you. If you are not active on your LinkedIn yet, I strongly recommend that you start making a plan to post once a month to begin with, and then maybe once a week and daily max. There are people who spend their whole days on LinkedIn, and I personally, as a recruiter, I don't think that's in your best interest. As a recruiter, I say maybe a few posts a week, keeping that alive. It lets us know what your interests are professionally as well as personally. If when you graduate from Tech Moms, you want to let people know that, and then make sure you're showing up on people's feeds. That's a really natural way that LinkedIn can help you keep the relationship warm. If you're not on LinkedIn, send them emails once in a while saying, hey, still thinking about the informational interview, you had said X, Y, and Z things, and it actually was something I applied to this part of my life. Or because you said this, I have now, been interviewing for X, Y, and Z positions. And that does take a little more intentionality on your part. So just remember small things like that. It doesn't, again, have to be a novel, 100 words, just to say, hey, I'm thinking of you.
Jenna, can I add something in here? And maybe you're going to talk about this in a minute, but another way to kind of keep that relationship alive is actually following them on LinkedIn, liking their posts, commenting on their posts, because that reminds them, oh yeah, Jenna likes the things that I'm talking about. She's interested in this industry. And that's a way, and it's actually helpful because people's posts are boosted and they get seen by more people if they get that kind of engagement. So that's a way that you can kind of show them that you're staying in touch with them, that you're supporting what they're doing, and that you're grateful for the connection that you've made.
Yeah, that's a great point, Robin. Thank you. Being active like that, it's like Facebook, but for your work. And I think LinkedIn is much more casual now than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. And so, you can have multiple reactions, you can laugh, you can make jokes on LinkedIn. And it's a much more pleasant place to be now than it was when I started my professional career. So that's what I have about in informational interviews in general. What I talked about was the standard informational interviewing world, where you have to do some cold calling, you have to do the research to identify a person. But I want to talk about Zions Bancorporation, A, because it's my company and I think we rock, but also because I wish more companies had a formal informational interviewing program that made it easier on you, because all of those normal anxious, nervous emotions I talked about, we all get those. And for a company and as a recruiter, I don't want you to feel like that. I want you to feel like my company is accessible to you, because we are. And so at Zions Bancorporation, we have this formal program where you sign up to do an informational interview. You are going to tell me personally, Jenna, via a form, your 2 lines of business that you're most interested in. At Zions Bancorporation in Utah, we have over 15 lines of business that we hire for in the state. And I will connect you with the person who best fits your career interest. But also, if you want to meet somebody who has the shared salient identities as you, I will also work to find someone who meets those needs as well. You are signing up for a 30-minute interview. It's going to be over Teams, so a video chat. You and the participant from the company decide a beneficial time to meet. You come with questions. I also send you an email that has all of the things I talked about in this presentation hyperlinked, and I will drop those links in the chat as well. So you're not set adrift. You're just, you're given some support and some bumpers to make your time the most useful it can be for both you and the interviewee. And then after that, we keep in touch. Just like I said, you need to keep a warm relationship with the people that you interview and have connections with on LinkedIn. So do I as a recruiter. I want to make sure you know the great things that we're doing. And so we'll connect on LinkedIn. We'll talk. I'll send some emails about when we make changes to the company, like when the tech campus in Midvale is unveiled, when we have new positions that I think might fit you, I'll email you. And so those are some pros of doing the informational interview program at Zions Bancorporation. I invite you all to do it. Again, the QR code, you just need to get your phone out, turn on your camera. If you have a smartphone, take that picture. It will automatically take you to our registration link. And again, I'm the human at the other end, so don't think that you're just going to go through some algorithm. I will see your notes. I will see what you're interested in. I'll know you from this presentation, and we'll take care of you and get you connected with someone who can really help you in your career. That's all I have, Robin. We didn't go until 7:50, but I would be happy to talk to people about questions they have. Did anyone write down their question that didn't get answered? Let's start there. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so we can see each other.
All right, who's got their questions to share? I know I have a lot, but I always have questions. I talk too much. So I'd love to invite some of you to share your questions that you were thinking of, whether the first one that you wrote down at the beginning of the presentation or other things that you've been thinking of during the presentation.
I have a question. Woohoo! So I just was thinking about, you did answer my question, by the way. I wrote down you answered that. But my question is kind of, basically, right now I am going to school, right? And I have like a future in an industry, but I don't feel like I have like a present in the industry. And so I just was kind of curious, like, sometimes I feel like I'm like, oh, now is not the time. I gotta wait until I'm like closer. Maybe that's my procrastination, or like it's just extra hard work. But yeah, like, how do you recommend people doing that? I mean, because I also feel like it's easy to make the connections, but sometimes it feels hard to keep them warm. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the predicament you're in is really common for students. What I would say is you have to choose things like electives, most likely, in your classwork, and you want to make the most of that. So I would suggest starting your informational interviews now. It's also really helpful to be able to fall back on a class that you're in. So if you're in a class that's really piqued your interest, you might reach out to somebody who, I'm sorry, I don't really know a lot about technology classes, but maybe you're in a computer science class. And so you see someone with a LinkedIn profile that has some of the topics that you're interested in. You might reach out to them and say, hi, so-and-so, I am a student at this university. I am currently taking a class in X, Y, and Z. Your profile matched the things that I am finding myself interested in, that I am asking myself, I want to learn more. How do I learn more about this? Would you be willing to spend some time with me to answer some of my questions about this field?
Cool.
It's always better to ground it in something that you're experiencing now versus just a, hey, I thought you were really cool. So.
Can I add a real example of this?
Please.
So a few years ago, I was doing a presentation while I was working at eBay, and I had a number of students that came in to talk about potential internships at eBay, and I did a presentation. What I loved was these girls came up to me after, and they said, "We want to get to know you. We love your background and career, and that's where we want to go. Can we just meet you for lunch?" And so we ended up going to lunch. I've stayed friends with them for all these years. And Hazley is now one of our Tech Moms coaches. She comes in and is one of our mentors. And those relationships, like if you reach out and you connect with people, some of them, can be short term and they help you get into a position, but other times they can actually develop into long-term, mutually supportive, right, relationships. So, even if you're in school or you're on your path and you're not quite there yet, building those relationships and building your network now is really, really important.
Thank you, Trina. That's such a great real life example. And I love that she's a coach now. I'm trying to drum up some coaches from our Women in Technology BRG for you all. So
we're excited about that. Hey, Kelly, are you okay to ask your question? I'd love you to ask it.
Sure. So I just wonder, Jenna, what's your approach as far as when you have an ask, are you asking for a video chat to get a more likely yes versus asking them out to coffee or lunch or something that, takes more time for them to physically meet you? What have you found to be successful?
Yeah, well, I think my answer has changed drastically in the pandemic. I will be transparent that at Zions Bancorporation and the bank, most of our employees are working from home, and we're not requiring them to leave the house or office in order to perform business functions. And so right now, I definitely say a virtual call is the best way to go. I also think it's important to think of the power differential between you and the person you want to interview. Do not take this as me saying that you should not interview somebody who's 5 steps up the ladder from where you would be entering the company. You should do that. Like I said, you should be forward facing. You should always be thinking about where you want to be in the next 5 years. But I'm an individual contributor. I've been in the company for 6 months. If I want to interview the executive vice president, I want to respect their time a little differently than if I was interviewing my fellow individual contributor who just is an HRBP, which is a business partner. And so for someone where there's a really different and extreme power differential, I would suggest staying to the phone or video chat for your first interaction. And then if it does progress into something where there's a natural mentorship, then you might do a coffee or lunch. I always, again, go with the coffee because some people are better virtually than they are in person. And so the coffee is, or, a diet, getting a soda or a snack is always a better, is a safer option in my opinion than really going for the full investment in a meal.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for your question.
That's such a good point. And Jenna, I feel that way too. I think a year and a half ago, I was always taking people to lunch. I was always doing all of this. And one of the things I realized, I've kept doing that all throughout the pandemic. And I realized, wow, I can do it in a third the time. I can have this interview and other people can. And so I think the trend moving forward will definitely be toward these virtual calls. But I love the idea that as you start building the relationship with some of these people that you interview, that it will turn into an in-person thing one day when everybody's comfortable doing that. But that's a great question. Ben, I'd love you to ask your question if you're willing to do that.
Oh, Robin, you're on mute.
He might not be taking himself off mute yet. Oh yeah, okay, Ben, go
There
ahead.
we are. Hi, sorry, it took me a second. Now I got to remember what I had asked. Okay. Our informational interviews, are they like standard across all industries, or are they or like, for example, like I'm looking into to get into the entertainment industry, or a sort of a like an artsy or art field or something along those lines. Are informational industries standard for those kind of industries as well?
So I will name that my area of familiarity, if not expertise, is in the business realm. And so what I initially want to say is that what I talked about is for a more transactional environment that's a little more formal, like the business, banking, technology. But I do think that, yes, they are standard across all industries, but go by different names and look and feel differently depending on what the norms of that industry are. So for instance, Ben, you're interested in the entertainment industry. What I know about that industry is that it's very relational. So it's probably more likely that you would go for that first coffee versus a video chat to begin with, because they're so relational. You might not be calling it an interview, but it may be like, hey, I want to pick your brain. Something a little more relational, much more casual, to get that conversation started. I don't know anything about the art industry, so I cannot speak to that, but I think entertainment and art tend to overlap a little. So perhaps that's true. But Robin, do you have any idea, anything to contribute?
You know, I absolutely think that they are standard across all industries. And I think your answer is spot on. They might look a little different. The tone might be a little different, but this policy, I mean, not policy, but this process of finding people who are doing the types of things you want to do, asking them, inviting them to spend a little bit of time with you to tell you about what they do. I really think it's standard across every field. And so absolutely, Ben, I think the answer is yes to that one. All right, Belinda, you had a great question. Can you ask that for us?
Can you hear me? Okay. I just wanted to know, what should you avoid? What questions should you avoid at an informational interview? Is there any subject,
yes,
that's off limits?
Yeah, in one of my earlier slides, I talked about what they aren't, and they're not an interview. So you could have been vibing with this person. They've been telling you their life, what they wish they'd known when they were a student, what they wish they'd known as they were becoming a parent in this industry. And you can ruin all of that by saying, so how do I get a job with your company?
Right.
I've been in several interviews where I have either watched somebody do that or had them directly ask me that question. And it's like slamming on the brakes. Instead of about me and you and what Trina was talking about as a mutually beneficial relationship, it's now very transactional. And that's going to feel different. Different people will respond to that differently. So that's definitely one question you shouldn't ask. I think it is different to say, if you were upfront in the beginning that, I am starting a job search, I am interested in your industry. Based on what you've shared, I think that I might be interested in X, Y, and Z position. Do you have any advice around that? I think that is a completely different question than how do I get a job with your company? Just being direct like that in general is not really welcome. We like the relationship. Even in a Western society that's very individualized, we still like the relationship. Oh, wow. So Trina's comment, don't tell them you want their job. You had an employee do this in an informational interview. That's aggressive. And in not the best way. There are definitely places in your career where you want to be aggressive and assertive, but I can see how that would rub you the wrong way, Trina.
So Jenna, I've got a similar question. For a lot of us, it's important to understand what our salary range might be in that type of role. And we have a real taboo against like asking how much people make and things like that. What's a way to find out what is the long-term potential in this career pathway or things like that? Like, how can we ask that question about how much money we can make in this role in a way that's palatable?
So first, I want to give a shout out to the occupational handbook that is offered by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. The BLS, every year they publish the handbook, and it tells you what you could expect for different roles based on your education. And it also tells you a little bit about what the work environment is like, what kind of personalities might be drawn to these industries. And it gives you, again, that like really life cycle look at salary ranges. This is a really sticky question, and I personally don't ask this question in an informational interview, but I would. Okay, and let me roll this back. I would not ask it in an informational interview to someone who is not a recruiter. So if you come to me and you want to do an informational interview with me because I am the Tech Moms recruiter, I want you to think of me like that. I am here. A recruiter is your advocate in the job search process. So if you tell me, hey, I'm graduating from Tech Mom soon, I have X, Y, and Z skills, I'm interested in learning more about the company, I am going to say yes. I'm going to say when, where, what works best for you. And if you really want to get coffee, let's go get coffee. Like, we'll do that, right? That's how dedicated I am to making sure you have a great candidate experience. That is the person you should be asking those salary questions to. I think a lot of people, especially for people like myself, who had never thought I would ever work in an industry where I would have a recruiter, help me, guide me through that process. I didn't know how to utilize a recruiter to their full extent. And so when you meet with a recruiter, you can ask those questions, and you should be upfront about what you need and what you think you deserve. This is tangential, but the reason that you want to be clear about your starting salary is that your starting salary is the most important salary you will ever negotiate in your career, because it is what sets your promotions and your merit based and your cost of living increases for the rest of your career. And some companies, they ask what you're currently making, and in some states that's illegal. It's illegal now to ask that in Colorado and California. And I anticipate that we'll see that across the other states as it becomes more popular. But that's why, Robin, your question has so much merit, but I would ask it of a recruiter and not of a general employee.
That is such good advice. I'm so glad I asked. So there are lots of other places that we can go to search to try to find that information, but an informational interview with most standard employees, not the right place to ask about salary. But if we're talking to recruiters, we can go ahead and have that conversation. And everybody should know that we'll plan on having a salary negotiation, a Better Way Thursday down the line coming up later on. So we're going to talk a lot about those types of issues. But I love that we got to this question. All right, who else has questions that we want to keep asking? I've got a few more, but I would love to hear other thoughts from you.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I'm curious, if you are having an informational interview with at a place that you're interested in working, how do you dance that line between, and I guess, like, does it, I know you should never expect that it should actually turn into a job interview or a job offer. That is not on the table. But I just want to know, how do you express your enthusiasm for the industry or the company? How do you express that without it sounding like I'm so desperate to get a job with you?
No, I totally understand that. The desperation was real for me in September and October last year. Well, I was hired by October, but in September, I was desperate. I'd been unemployed for 2 months. It was the middle of the pandemic. So I completely understand that. This is where transparency in that initial email or outreach that you have really matters, where it sets the tone for what you want to get out of your meeting. And I think it's perfectly reasonable. I've never had any qualms with someone saying, hi, I'm interested in your company. I wouldn't say the industry. The industry is a little too vague. And remember, an interview process is all about the wooing and winning each other over, making sure egos are massaged and taken care of. And so what I would want to see, Amanda, if you're asking me as a general person or as a recruiter, is saying, Hi, Jenna. I am interested in going into tech field. I see that Zions Bancorporation has a large division of technology, or you can say that you've heard it from someone. I would like to learn more about the different job opportunities at your company, and your position of X, Y, and Z really stood out to me. Would you be willing to have a informational interview? So that lets me know upfront what you want to get out of it. It also lets me, as the interviewee, know what I need to prepare in order to give you a good experience. And then it doesn't take me off guard if you were to ask it later on. Again, that stomping of the brakes. You've just set the tone, and I think that's really natural because everyone in the back of their minds knows that informational interviewing is about professional and job development. It's just how we go about signaling that to other folks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
That's a really good question. So thank you for asking.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was a fantastic question. When we had our Tech Moms Latinas launch a couple of months ago, we had a panel up there, and one of our panelists was a founder of a startup. So she had a lot of experience in starting companies like that. And she gave a little piece of advice that was related to specifically fundraising for startups. But I think a lot of it is relevant to this conversation as well. And she said, if you go out to venture capitalists and other people who have money to invest and you ask them for money, they'll give you advice. But if you ask them for advice, they'll give you money. And I think this is part of the question, part of this process here, that when we're approaching people, I think it's perfectly appropriate to say to somebody, I would love, what is your advice for me if I'm looking to get into this role? What sort of advice do you have for me that would help me be successful? Instead of saying, can you help me get a job? Saying, again, that's flattering them and also asking them for their expertise. They've obviously gotten a job in a company that you're interested in. And so I don't think someone would turn it down if you ask them for advice, but if you ask them for help, like, can you help me get this job? That's kind of off-putting, and maybe they'll just give you advice instead of the help that you need. So I thought that was a fun little phrase there.
I really like that. And I think the asking for the job that comes after the informational interviewing has happened and after you've kept that relationship warm. Because, my personal example is that I had done an informational interview with a former colleague of mine who had made the transition from higher ed into tech. We had talked, and then I came back to her and I said, after we talked, I've talked to other people. I'm really serious about human resources. I'm going to start my job search. Can I count on you as a resource to help me meet new people and also to keep me informed if you hear of any jobs in Salt Lake? And that was how I navigated that kind of minefield, but that's how I did it. That's another way to go about it.
Jenna, I love that. And that leads me to share my most favorite question in all networking conversations and all information interviews. And you all know that I'm a networking fanatic, right? Like, networking is my jam. And so, and I got this question from my dad, actually, who's the OG networker. He's 82 and he's still doing it. But at the end of every conversation, he thanks the person so much. This has been so helpful for me. Who else should I be talking to? And I love that question, because as we are all starting in new industries, we are expanding and building our networks. And so if I ask Jenna that question, Jenna, thank you so much. This was so helpful for me. Who else should I be talking to? Who else might have some ideas or who I could learn from? Then Jenna is helping me build my own network, and she's giving me, because in a lot of cases she'll say, oh, I'll introduce you to so-and-so, these couple of people. And so we're getting a warm intro in the first place, but also we're building and expanding our networks. And in a lot of cases, Jenna might not have the right answers, exactly what I need, but she might know just the person who does have that. So that question, I want to encourage all of you to get used to saying that at the end of these conversations. Who else should I be talking to?
That's such a great question. I should adopt that as well. And did you want me to answer? Are you asking me that?
Maybe, probably. You are the person that I need to be talking to. I know that you've got it all for me. We've got another question from Ben. To keep the relationship warm, how often should we contact them and not get annoying? Ha ha ha. That's a great question.
I think, again, this is where I personally rely on LinkedIn. Admittedly, sometimes I forget to keep relationships warm that are not on LinkedIn, that are not somebody who I see at the grocery store or invite to my birthday parties. And so LinkedIn, again, I think is great. It is like anything, it's something that you want to curate. So you're going to have your persona, you're going to be having the vision of yourself that you're putting out there on LinkedIn, and you want to keep it regular. So it's very noticeable to people like myself who are on LinkedIn every day when someone is starting to change their career. Because all of a sudden the posts become more frequent. They become very much more goal oriented versus, oh, here was this good article I read. It might be, look at this report I did, or look at this fancy award I got from work. And the frequency is upticking. So if you are, at a passive stage in your career search where you're just getting ready, you're having those relationships that you're establishing that you want to keep warm, I would say once a week at a maximum and once a month at a minimum. Just so people know that you're active, you're going on. And like what Robin said is being active on LinkedIn is not just posting, but it's liking the different things that people are posting. So like I post for the bank every day. And so by commenting on, liking that, giving it a thumbs up, saying, oh, this is so cool, that's keeping that relationship warm. And I have actually, advocated for applicants because I know that they're actually genuinely interested in the bank, because for the entire time I've worked for the Bancorporation, they have liked our posts. I know that they're serious about us, even though we have never had a face-to-face conversation, but I see their name every week. So that's what I would say. If they're not on LinkedIn where you need to really be doing that manual individualized outreach, I would say once a quarter is a really good way to start. That's where I usually try to keep it at, once a quarter. And then again, if you are developing into that mentorship sponsorship relationship, it will naturally reach a cadence that feels appropriate to both you and the other individual. Of course.
Fantastic. All right, we are about out of time. So if you've got any more quick questions, let us know. Otherwise, I want to say thank you so much to Jenna. This has been absolutely fantastic. This is such important information, and this presentation was so helpful. For those, if you've got other contacts who didn't get a chance to join us tonight, please let them know that they can watch this video later. And we will plan on seeing you next week, where we're talking to Steve King and Luke Mock. And that'll be a great conversation about next steps, jobs opportunities for us. And then in 2 weeks, we will be talking to Dell. In the meantime, congratulations to all our tech moms who are looking to graduate soon. And for those of us who are getting started, we're excited for this journey that you're on. And for our guests who are with us tonight from other areas, thank you so much for coming. We hope that you find these workshops useful. We are learning so much. And thanks, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic night.